They shoot him 3 times and throw him into Busan harbor, certain that dead men collect no debts and keep no secrets. The rain that night falls so hard it erases the gunshots before the echo can find the warehouses lining the pier. Kang Do-hyun, 34 years old, feels the cold water close over his head and thinks, absurdly, of the tailored gray suit ruining around him, $6,000 of Italian wool turning to dead weight. A thin white scar already cuts through his left eyebrow, souvenir of a knife fight he won 9 years earlier. Tonight he loses something larger. He was the second son of the Baekho Syndicate, the White Tiger's most trusted blade, the man Chairman Oh Tae-sung called son in every way that mattered, except blood. Tonight he is nothing. A body in black water, sinking toward the silt, betrayed by the one man who called him brother. His name was Yoon Jae-min. They grew up 2 streets apart in a Busan slum where the only inheritance was hunger, and the syndicate raised them both from nothing, fed them, armed them, taught them that loyalty was the only currency that never devalued. Do-hyun believed it. He believed it in the alley where he took a blade meant for Jaemin's spine. He believed it the night Chairman Oh, dying of a slow cancer he hid from everyone but his 2 sons, in all but name, called Do-hyun into his study and told him the throne would be his. He believed it right up until the moment Jaemin's men dragged him onto the dock in the rain, and Jaemin himself, weeping real tears, pressed the gun into his own lieutenant's hand and said the words that would follow Do-hyun into the water like an anchor. He was always going to choose you over me. I couldn't let that happen. Do-hyun remembers, even as the cold steals the feeling from his fingers, the exact texture of the years that led to this water. He remembers being 19, a boy with nothing but a switchblade and a grudge against a world that had already decided what he was allowed to become. Standing in the rain outside a gambling den in Nampodong when Chairman Oh Tae-sung first noticed him breaking up a fight, 3 men were losing badly. The old man did not offer him money that night. He offered him a bowl of soup and a question. What do you want your life to mean, boy? Do-hyun had no answer then. He built one, brick by brick, over 15 years of loyalty that never once wavered, not when he took a bullet meant for a rival's son at 19, not when he sat by Chairman Oh's hospital bed through 3 rounds of chemotherapy the old man hid from the rest of the syndicate, not when he taught a scrawny, ambitious boy named Yoon Jae-min how to hold a gun without flinching and called him brother because the syndicate had no better word for what 15 years of shared danger makes of 2 men. He remembers Chairman Oh's study, smelling of cedar and cigarettes, the old man's hand, spotted with age, closing over his on the night everything changed. You have the heart for this chair, son. Jaemin has the hunger. Hunger without heart destroys everything it touches. Do-hyun did not understand then that the old man was writing his death sentence into that sentence, that somewhere beyond the study door, Jaemin was already listening. The current takes him out past the breakwater. By some mercy that has nothing to do with fate and everything to do with a fisherman's net dragging low that night, a boat belonging to a woman named Han Mi-suk finds him at 4 in the morning, more corpse than man. She is not Baekho. She is not anyone's. She trades in information the way other people trade in fish, and she recognizes the White Tiger's tattoo on his ribs, and she makes a decision that will detonate a decade later. She does not call anyone. She does not sell what she knows. She stitches him closed on her kitchen table with fishing line and whiskey, and when he wakes screaming 3 days later, she tells him the only thing he needs to hear. You are already dead. Everyone who tries to be reborn as themselves fails, becomes someone else. 10 years pass in Gangnam, in Singapore, in Zurich, in every glass tower where old money forgets to ask hard questions about new money. Kang Do-hyun becomes Han Suk-jun, majority owner of Iron Crescent Capital, a private equity firm with a reputation for buying broken companies and making them profitable. No questions asked about the seller's desperation. He keeps the scar. He grows the suits sharper, the silence colder, the patience longer than any enforcers should be. Underneath the boardrooms and the shell companies, He builds something no one in Seoul understands yet, a lattice of ownership so intricate that half of Baekho's laundering fronts now quietly answer, several corporate layers removed, to a man everyone believes drowned in Busan harbor a decade ago. He does not do it for money. Money was never the wound. The wound is a brother's face in the rain, and the only cure Do-hyun has found for it in 10 years is patience sharpened into a weapon. The years between the water and the penthouse are not glamorous, whatever the tabloids later imagine when they profile the reclusive chairman Han. The first 2 are the hardest, spent in a cramped apartment above a noodle shop in Zurich's industrial quarter, relearning how to speak without the Busan accent that would give him away, relearning how to walk without the particular economy of movement that marks a man trained to kill. He works nights loading freight to fund a business degree he completes online under a borrowed identity, and he studies markets the way he once studied knife angles. Hungrily, obsessively, because a man cannot outfight an empire, but he can, given enough patience, outthink one. Han Mi-suk wires him money twice, small amounts scraped from her fishing income, with notes that say only, "Don't waste it," and become the closest thing to family correspondence he allows himself for 3 years. By year 4, he has his first real acquisition, a failing textile importer with a supply contract that, buried 9 layers deep in subcontractor paperwork, touches one of Baekho's oldest laundering routes through the port of Busan. He does not move against it. He simply buys a small, silent stake and waits, the way he was trained to wait in doorways for hours without shifting his weight. By year 7, Iron Crescent Capital is a name investment bankers in 3 countries recognize, and nobody who meets Chairman Han Suk-jun, precise, unreadable, devastatingly competent, ever imagines that 10 years earlier he could not hold a spoon without his hand shaking from blood loss. Thomas Bay finds him in year 3, having spent that long searching every hospital, morgue, and rumor in 3 countries because he refused to believe the man who trained him could really be dead. And when Do-hyun opens the door of that Zurich apartment to find his old subordinate standing there with tears in his eyes, it is the first time since Han Mi-suk's kitchen table that Do-hyun allows himself to be held by another human being without flinching. The present finds him in a Gangnam penthouse, 40 floors above the city, the kind of apartment where the floor-to-ceiling windows turn Seoul's neon into a second sky, red and gold and electric blue, bleeding across marble at 2 in the morning while he cannot sleep. He stands there most nights with a glass of untouched whiskey, watching the Han River cut the city in half like a wound that never closed, and he thinks about a dock in Busan, and a man who used to be his brother. His housekeeper has long since learned not to ask why Chairman Han never sleeps past 2 nights in a row without waking drenched in sweat, why he keeps a single faded photograph locked in a drawer no one is permitted to open, why a man with more money than most small nations still eats plain rice and grilled fish on the nights that fall in late autumn. Near the anniversary of a death the official record does not even list under his real name. His empire runs with the same discipline he once brought to a blade, precise, patient, utterly without waste, and the men who work for him describe him, when pressed, in the careful language people use for someone they respect but cannot quite claim to know. Tonight, his phone lights up on the counter. Thomas Bay, his head of security, and the only man from his old life who found him, instead of the other way around, 3 years into his exile, sends a single line. Yoon Jae-min is expanding into pharmaceuticals. Board meeting Thursday. Grant, no, wrong file. He corrects himself half a second later, laughing without humor at his own tiredness. He rereads the actual message. Baekho Pharma launch event Friday. Jae-min will be there personally. So will prosecutor SEO. Do-hyun sets the whiskey down without drinking it. Prosecutor SEO is Seo-yun, 29 years old the last time he saw her. 17 now would make her 29. He corrects himself again. 10 years changes arithmetic as much as it changes everything else. Seo-yun, his chairman O's only daughter, the girl who used to fall asleep in her father's study while Do-hyun and Jae-min argued about territory maps spread across the desk. The young woman who screamed his name into the rain the night he disappeared because someone told her he had been the one embezzling from the Syndicate, that he ran rather than face judgment. She has spent 10 years believing her father's most trusted son was a thief and a coward. She has spent 5 of those years as a prosecutor, building a case against the organization that killed her father in every way that mattered, even if the official cause of death was listed as cardiac failure. Do-hyun knows better. Cancer does not explain why Chairman Oh's last months were spent isolated, cut off from every ally, poisoned slowly not by disease but by his own successor's paranoia. He picks the phone back up. Confirm my attendance at the pharma launch under the Iron Crescent name. And, Thomas, find out everything Prosecutor SEO has on Baek Ho's supply chain. I want to know what she knows before she knows what I know. The launch is held in a glass atrium on the top floor of a tower in Yeouido. White orchids and champagne towers, and a banner reading Baek Ho Pharmaceuticals, a legacy of care, the kind of corporate theater that makes Do-hyun's jaw tighten because he remembers when Baek Ho's legacy was extortion and gambling dens, not press releases. String quartets play something classical and forgettable near the elevator bank. Waiters in white gloves circulate with trays of yuzu champagne, and beyond the floor-to-ceiling glass, the Han River bridges light up one by one as the sky goes from orange to violet to the flat electric black of a Seoul night. Do-hyun stands near the window for a long moment before entering the crowd, watching his own reflection ghost over the skyline, a stranger in a $5,000 suit wearing another man's careful stillness like armor. 10 years have changed the Syndicate's face, if not its heart. Yoon Jae-min stands at the center of the room in a suit that costs more than most Seoul apartments. 41 years old now, silver threading through his temples in a way the tabloids call distinguished. A faint tremor in his left hand that he has learned to hide by keeping it in his pocket or wrapped around a champagne flute. Do-hyun watches from across the room and feels something colder than hatred settle into his chest. Jae-min looks tired. Jae-min looks like a man who has spent a decade running from something, and Do-hyun understands, better than anyone alive, exactly what that something is. Chairman Han, Jae-min says, crossing the room with his hand already extended, a smile arranged with the precision of a man who has performed sincerity in front of cameras 1,000 times. Iron Crescent's reputation precedes you. I am honored you could make time for us. The handshake lasts exactly as long as protocol demands. Do-hyun feels the tremor in Jae-min's grip and says nothing about it. The honor is mine, Do-hyun says, and his voice is not the voice Jae-min remembers. 10 years and a throat scarred by drowning have seen to that. Baek Ho's transformation is remarkable. Legitimate pharmaceuticals from a company with your history. That takes vision. Something flickers behind Jae-min's eyes. There and gone, the reflexive paranoia of a man who has spent a decade waiting for the past to collect on its debt. History is a word for things that are finished, Jae-min says. We prefer to talk about the future. Across the room, a woman in a charcoal suit watches the exchange with the flat, assessing gaze of someone building a case in her head before she has even decided there is one to build. Seo-yeon has cut her hair short since Do-hyun last saw her, and there is a hardness around her mouth that was not there when she was 19, but the eyes are the same eyes that used to look at him like he was the safest thing in a dangerous house. Tonight those eyes catalog him as a stranger, an investment banker with a scar and better tailoring than his balance sheet should allow, one more predator, circling an organization she has spent 5 years trying to gut. She does not recognize him. 10 years, a different name, a face reconstructed by a Zurich surgeon after the bullet that grazed his jaw, and a dead man's careful stillness have made sure of that. She approaches him near the orchid display 20 minutes later, holding a glass of sparkling water she has not touched, and introduces herself as though they have never met, and Do-hyun's chest aches in a way he has not allowed it to ache in a decade. Chairman Han, she says. Prosecutor Seo Ji-yeon. Financial crimes. Seo-yeon, he thinks. She still uses her middle name professionally, the way she always said she would, the way she told him once, 16 years old, sitting on the edge of her father's desk while he cleaned a pistol he was too young to be trusted with, that Ji-yeon sounded like someone brave, and Seo-yeon sounded like someone's little sister, and she wanted, badly, to be the first thing. A pleasure, Prosecutor Seo, he says, and hopes his voice does not betray him. I understand you take a professional interest in Baek Ho. I take a professional interest in companies that launder blood money through legitimate industries, she says, unsmiling. I'm curious what a firm with Iron Crescent's clean reputation is doing shaking hands with them tonight. Studying the competition, Do-hyun says, and perhaps looking for opportunities to acquire distressed assets before they finish distressing themselves. Something in the phrasing catches her, a flicker of curiosity crossing the assessment in her eyes, and for one unbearable second Do-hyun thinks she might actually see him, the ghost standing in front of her in a stranger's face. Then a photographer's flash cuts the moment in half, and she is called away by a colleague, and the ghost exhales. 3 weeks later, the first true escalation arrives, delivered not as violence but as an invitation, which in Do-hyun's old world was often worse. Jae-min requests a private dinner at a restaurant in Itaewon, known for hosting men who prefer their business conducted where the walls are thick and the staff are paid to be blind. Do-hyun goes, because refusing would raise questions he cannot yet afford, and because some hollowed-out part of him wants, one more time, to sit across from the man who used to be his brother and study the ruins of what they once were. The private room smells of grilled short rib and cigarette smoke, despite the no-smoking signs no one in this restaurant has ever enforced. Jae-min sits with his back to the wall, an old habit neither of them ever unlearned, and pours soju with a hand that shakes just slightly on the neck of the bottle. You remind me of someone, Jae-min says, halfway through the second bottle, his eyes wet and unfocused in the particular way of a man drinking to bury something rather than to celebrate. Someone I used to know. Do-hyun keeps his face still. Should I be flattered or worried? Worried, Jae-min says and laughs. A broken sound. He was the best man I ever knew. Loyal like a dog is loyal, you understand, not because he had to be but because it was in him, all the way down. And I killed him. The room goes very quiet. Somewhere beyond the paper walls, a kitchen worker drops a pan and swears. I had him shot and thrown into Busan harbor, Jae-min says, staring into his glass. 10 years ago, because our chairman was going to name him successor instead of me, and I told myself it was strategy. I told myself the organization needed a leader who could be ruthless. But the truth, Chairman Han, the truth is I was jealous of a man who never once, not one single time in 15 years, gave me a reason to doubt him, and I have not slept a full night since. Do-hyun's hand does not shake around his glass. He has spent 10 years learning not to shake. But something in his chest cracks open, hot and sudden, because he came here hunting a monster and found instead a man drowning in his own guilt, and he does not know, sitting in that smoke-thick room, whether that makes what is coming easier or infinitely harder. Guilt is a luxury for men who can still change something, Do-hyun says finally. What's done is done, Chairman Yoon. I find it's more useful to look forward. Jae-min pours another glass, his hand trembling harder now, and for a moment the polish of 10 years as a legitimate chairman slips entirely, revealing the frightened boy from Nampodong underneath it. You know what the worst part is, Chairman Han? He never once looked at me like he suspected. Not when they dragged him onto that dock, not when I put the gun in Solmin's hand instead of doing it myself, because I was too much of a coward to watch his face while it happened. He looked at me like he still believed I would stop it, even at the end, especially at the end. I have built an empire on top of that look, and some nights I would burn all of it down just to make it stop. Then why don't you? Do-hyun asks quietly, testing something he should not test, needing to hear the answer more than strategy requires. Because I don't know how to be anyone else anymore, Jae-min says, and drains the glass. None of us do. That's the joke of this whole business. We kill the men we love to become something, and then we discover the something isn't worth what it cost, and by then there's no getting the old self back. You'll learn that too, Chairman Han. If you stay in rooms like this long enough, you'd be surprised, Do-hyun says, what a man can claw back, given enough time. Jae-min looks at him for a long moment, something searching in his bloodshot eyes, and Do-hyun holds very still, the way he used to hold still in the seconds before a knife fight, and then Jae-min looks away, and the moment passes, and Do-hyun tells himself the ache in his chest is nothing, is old scar tissue, is a wound that has no business reopening now. The second escalation comes with rain, the way most bad nights in this story do. A month after the dinner, Do-hyun is leaving a late meeting at one of his shell holdings in a converted warehouse district near the Han River when a car pulls alongside him on a dark side street, headlights off, and a man steps out whom Do-hyun recognizes instantly despite the 10 years, despite the added weight, and the graying buzz cut. Baek Sol-min, Jae-min's chief enforcer now, once a junior soldier Do-hyun trained personally, taught to load a pistol, taught to throw a punch that would not break his own wrist. Sol-min studies him under the streetlight, rain sliding off the brim of a cap pulled low, and something in his face goes uncertain, the particular uncertainty of a man seeing a ghost he cannot quite place. "You walk like someone I used to know," Sol-min says, cigarette smoke curling up past his face, mixing with the steam of his breath in the cold rain. "Is that a compliment or an accusation?" Do-hyun says, keeping his voice pitched lower than his own, the trick he has practiced for a decade. "Depends who you ask," Sol-min says, and steps closer, close enough that Do-hyun can smell the whiskey on him, close enough that Do-hyun's whole body remembers, unbidden, exactly how to end this confrontation in 4 seconds if it becomes necessary. "Boss Yoon's been strange since he met you. Doesn't sleep. Keep saying your walk, your hands, something about you reminds him of a dead man. I told him dead men don't shake hands at pharmaceutical launches. But I don't know, there's something about your eyes." Do-hyun does not blink. "Tell your boss that if he wants to discuss business, he can call my office. I don't do alleyway meetings, Mr. Beck." He walks away before Sol-min can answer, every step measured, every muscle screaming to run, and only when he is 3 blocks away, soaked through, does he allow his hands to shake. Behind him, Sol-min stands under the streetlight a long moment, cigarette burning down unsmoked between his fingers, and does not follow. He has spent 10 years believing the man who taught him to fight died a thief and a traitor. He is not yet ready to believe otherwise. But that night, for the first time since the funeral no one held because there was no body to bury, he takes the framed photograph of his old training days out of a drawer he had not opened in years, and studies the eyes in it long after the cigarette has burned to ash between his fingers. The 5th wound comes disguised as an old debt collected in an underground gambling den in Hongdae, 3 floors below a Norabang that exists mostly to explain the foot traffic to police who are paid, generously and regularly, to misunderstand it. Do-hyun goes there not for Baek-ho business but because Han Mi-suk, visiting Seoul for a rare week, insists on seeing the tables her late husband used to run before Baek-ho absorbed his small independent operation 2 decades ago, and Do-hyun, who owes her a debt he can never finish repaying, cannot refuse her one evening of nostalgia. The room is thick with cigarette smoke curling blue under low copper lamps, the click of mahjong tiles, and the hiss of cards underneath, a low murmuring soundtrack of men losing money they cannot afford to lose. It is here, watching Han Mi-suk laugh for the first time in years at a card table, that Do-hyun feels a hand close hard around his shoulder and turns to find Yoon Chol-min himself, smiling with the particular confidence of an ambitious man who has already decided he no longer needs to fear consequences. "Chairman Han," Chol-min says, his voice pitched for an audience of soldiers seated at the surrounding tables, pretending not to listen, "I hear Iron Crescent's been buying up quite a lot of paper connected to Baek-ho's supply chain. A man in my position has to wonder whether you're an investor or a vulture circling something that's about to change hands rather violently very soon." "A man in my position finds vultures useful," Do-hyun says evenly, holding the younger man's gaze without blinking. "They tell you exactly where the carcasses are before anyone else notices the smell." Chol-min's smile thins. "Careful, Chairman Han. Some of us remember what happened the last time someone got too close to that chair without permission. I'd hate for history to repeat itself on your watch, of all peoples." The threat is unmistakable, and it tells Do-hyun everything he needs to know about the timeline he is racing against. Chol-min is not simply ambitious, he is already counting days. "Some of us remember that lesson better than you think," Do-hyun says, and walks away before the younger man can read anything further in his face, though behind him, at the edge of hearing, he catches Chol-min murmuring something to a lieutenant about the docks, about a shipment, about a date circled in red on a calendar Do-hyun has not yet seen but already dreads. Han Mi-suk, oblivious to the exchange, wins the next hand at the card table and laughs loudly enough to turn heads, and Do-hyun watches her for a moment. This woman who pulled a stranger out of a harbor and asked nothing in return but that he become someone worth saving, and thinks that whatever is coming in the weeks ahead, he intends to make certain nothing in this city ever touches her again the way it touched him. The third and cruelest escalation is not delivered by Jae-min at all. It arrives 2 weeks later in the form of Seo-yeon showing up unannounced at Iron Crescent's offices, a folder under her arm, her prosecutor's badge doing the work, her smile does not. "I've been looking at your shell company structures," she says, sitting across from him in his own office without waiting for an invitation, spreading documents across his glass desk with the confidence of someone who has stopped asking permission a long time ago. 14 holding companies, all different names, all different registered agents, all eventually feeding back into 3 accounts that also happen to service Beck-Co Pharmaceuticals supply chain financing. That's either the most elaborate coincidence I've ever seen, Chairman Han, or you're laundering for them. Do-hyun feels his pulse spike and does not let it reach his face. Or, he says carefully, I'm quietly acquiring leverage over an organization you've spent 5 years failing to prosecute, and you're about to blow up 10 years of work because you can't see past the paperwork to the intention behind it. Her eyes narrow. 10 years, she repeats, something catching in the number, though she cannot say why. Explain that to me. Explain the intention, Chairman Han, because from where I'm sitting you look exactly like every other man who's ever gotten rich standing next to the white tiger, and my father died standing too close to men exactly like you. The mention of her father lands like a blade between his ribs. He wants, more than he has wanted anything in a decade, to reach across the desk and tell her everything. The dock, the water, Han Mi-suk's kitchen table, 10 years of grief disguised as ambition. He wants to tell her that her father's last words to him were a promise about the future she is now trying to prosecute him for building. He says none of it. She sets a photograph on his desk, deliberately, the way a prosecutor lays out an exhibit for a jury, an old picture of Chairman Oh Tae-sung standing between 2 young men outside a Busan restaurant, one of them broad-shouldered and grinning with a scar just beginning to form through his left eyebrow, the other slighter, sharper-eyed, already watching the camera with the calculating expression of a man measuring his own future. My father kept this in his desk drawer until the day he died, she says. He called them his sons. One of them disappeared the same month my father's health collapsed, for no medical reason anyone could ever properly explain. I have spent 5 years asking myself which of these 2 men is capable of what happened to my father, Chairman Han, and every year the answer gets less comfortable, because the one everyone blamed is the one who is conveniently, permanently unavailable to defend himself. Your father's death was cardiac failure, Do-hyun says instead, voice carefully flat, refusing to let his eyes linger too long on the photograph, on the boy he used to be standing beside the brother who killed him. That's the official record. The official record is a lie someone paid a great deal of money to write, Seo-yeon says, standing, gathering her files with hands that are not quite steady. My father was murdered slowly by the man who took his chair, and everyone who might have stopped it either ran or died first. I intend to finish what they started. If you're building something to stop Beck-Ho, Chairman Han, you'd better start trusting me with the truth, because I am done being the last honest person standing in a room full of ghosts. She leaves without waiting for a response, and Do-hyun sits alone in the glass office as the city lights come up outside, and for the first time in 10 years he lets himself cry, silently, the way he learned to when Han Mi-suk's stitches pulled tight against his ribs and there was no one left to see him break. He thinks about the last time he saw her before the harbor, 17 years old, and furious at her father for refusing to let her attend university abroad, storming into the study where Do-hyun sat cleaning a weapon he had used earlier that week to end a rival's ambitions, and instead of being frightened of the blood he had not quite managed to wash from under his nails, she had simply sat down across from him and asked him to teach her to throw a knife properly, because if her father would not let her leave, she intended, at the very least, to learn how to protect herself inside the walls he kept her behind. He remembers thinking with the particular clarity of a much younger man who had not yet learned to distrust his own feelings, that he would tear the world apart before he let anything touch her. He kept that promise from a distance for 10 years, watching her law school graduation from behind a rented car 3 streets away, watching her swearing-in ceremony as a junior prosecutor from a hotel room across the street with a bottle of soju he never opened, present at every important moment of her life, as a ghost who could offer nothing but silent, useless devotion. Tonight, for the first time, she looked at him and saw only a stranger with suspicious paperwork, and something in that recognition, or the total absence of it, hurts worse than the 3 bullets ever did. Thomas Bay finds him there past midnight, and says nothing about the redness in his eyes, only sets a cup of tea on the desk, and stands at the window beside him in silence for a long while. The two of them, watching the Han River carry the city's reflected light out toward the sea, toward Busan, toward everything neither of them has ever fully learned to leave behind. 2 nights before that discovery, unable to sleep, Do-hyun drives 4 hours south to a quiet hillside cemetery outside Busan, where Chairman Oh Tae-sung is buried under a modest headstone that gives no hint of the empire the man once commanded, a small mercy Do-hyun, arranged anonymously through a lawyer years earlier, when he learned Jae-min intended a monument grand enough to photograph well for the press. He crouches in the dark beside the grave with a bottle of the old man's favorite macchioli, pours a measure onto the frost-hardened earth, and speaks aloud for the first time in a decade to the only father he ever truly had. "I kept my promise, sir," he says quietly, the words fogging in the cold air. "I did not let hunger win. It took longer than either of us thought it might, and I am not certain, some nights, that the man who survived is entirely the one you raised. But I am close. I am so close to finishing this the way you would have wanted it finished, with the truth standing in the light, instead of buried at the bottom of a harbor. I only wish you were here to tell me if I've become someone worth the chair you meant to give me." The wind moves through the pines above the hillside, and Do-hyun allows himself, for a few minutes in the dark, to simply grieve, uninterrupted by strategy or vengeance. A son visiting a father's grave the way any ordinary man might, before he drives back to Seoul before dawn. Exhaustion and resolve, braided so tightly together by then that he can no longer tell where one ends and the other begins. The 4th betrayal, the one that finally forces Do-hyun's hand, comes from inside Jae-min's own house. Baek Ho's rising lieutenant, a sharp-eyed younger man named Yoon Chul-min, no relation to Jae-min despite the shared surname that half of Busan seems cursed to carry, has spent 3 years quietly cultivating his own loyalists inside the organization, and Thomas Bay, Do-hyun's head of security, brings him the intelligence at midnight in the Gangnam penthouse, with the particular grimness of a man delivering news he already knows will complicate everything. "Chulmin's making a move," Thomas says, laying photographs across the marble counter, surveillance stills of late-night meetings in a warehouse Do-hyun recognizes as one of Baek Ho's old arms caches near the Busan docks, the same stretch of harbor where Do-hyun himself once bled into the water. He's telling the younger soldiers that Yoon Jae-min has gone soft, that pharmaceuticals and press conferences have made the organization weak, that it's time for a leader who remembers what the White Tiger actually is. Sound familiar, boss? It sounds exactly like the speech Jae-min gave to justify killing him, and Do-hyun feels the shape of history folding back on itself, a serpent close to closing its mouth around its own tail. He stands at the window for a long time, watching the neon smear across the wet glass, before he speaks again. "He's going to do to Jae-min exactly what Jae-min did to me," Do-hyun says quietly. "And if I do nothing, Jae-min dies at the docks the same way I nearly did, and Chul-min inherits an empire built on rot with no one left who even remembers what it cost to build it honestly." Thomas studies him carefully. "You almost sound like you'd mourn him." Do-hyun does not answer that directly. "I mourn the brother he used to be," he says finally. "The man standing in that restaurant 3 weeks ago, drowning in guilt over what he did to me. That man doesn't deserve mercy. But he doesn't deserve to be murdered by an ambitious child who learned cruelty by watching him, either. Nobody gets to inherit my revenge, Thomas. This ends the way I built it to end, on my terms, with the truth in the light where everyone can see it, not in the dark where lies breed forever. He picks up his phone and, for the first time in 10 years, dials a number he memorized long before he ever learned to forget it. Seo-yeon answers on the second ring, her voice sharp with suspicion at the unfamiliar hour. "Chairman Han, it's nearly 1 in the morning. I need you to come to my office," he says. "Tonight. Bring every file you have on my father's death. I mean, on Chairman O's death. And Prosecutor SEO, wear something you don't mind getting wet. It's still raining." The silence on the line stretches long enough that he wonders if she has hung up. When she speaks again, her voice has changed, gone careful and low, the voice of someone who has just heard something in the cadence of a stranger's sentence that does not belong to a stranger at all. "Who is this?" she says, very quietly. "Who is this really?" He almost tells her over the phone. He does not. Some truths deserve to be spoken to a face, in a room with enough light to see every scar. "Come to the office," he says instead, and hangs up before his voice can break. The twist unspools, not in a single dramatic sentence, but in the careful architecture Do-hyun has spent 10 years constructing, and it takes Seo-yeon the better part of an hour, sitting across the glass desk with her prosecutor's files fanned out beside his own, to understand the shape of what she is looking at. He tells her about the dock, the rain, the 3 bullets, Jae-min's tears as he handed the gun to a subordinate rather than pull the trigger himself, the coward's mercy of a man who could order a murder but not commit one with his own hands. He tells her about Han Mi-suk's kitchen table, about Zurich, about 10 years of building Iron Crescent one shell company at a time, each acquisition a brick in a wall, closing slowly around Baek Ho's laundering network, until, as of 6 months ago, Iron Crescent's web of holding companies controls, several layers removed from any name that could be traced, 41% of the assets Baek Ho Pharmaceuticals depends on to move its dirty money clean. "I never embezzled a single dollar from your father's organization," he says, and his voice breaks properly now, 10 years of careful control, finally giving way in front of the one person he never stopped wanting to tell the truth to. Jae-min invented the theft to justify what he'd already decided to do. "Your father was going to name me successor, and Jae-min could not survive being second to a man he called brother for 15 years. So he made me a thief in the story he told, and a corpse in the story he lived. And I let the world believe both because a dead thief can't come back to challenge anything, and I needed 10 years of nobody looking for me to build what I've built." Seo-yeon sits very still, her prosecutor's composure cracking apart in real time, 10 years of grief and certainty rearranging themselves around a truth she never let herself imagine. "Do-hyun," she says, his real name in her mouth for the first time in a decade, and it sounds like something breaking and mending at once. "You let me believe you were a coward. You let me believe my father trusted a thief. I let you believe the lie that kept you alive," he says. "Jae-min has spent 10 years afraid of ghosts. If he'd ever suspected you knew the truth, known that I was alive, he would have removed the risk. I couldn't protect you and tell you at the same time. I'm sorry. I am so sorry, Ji-yeon." She reaches across the desk, and her hand finds the scar through his eyebrow, tracing it the way she used to when she was 17 and reckless and certain the world could not touch either of them as long as they stood close enough together. And something in the room finally exhales after 10 years of held breath. "We finish this together," she says, wiping her eyes with the back of her wrist, Prosecutor Steele returning to her voice even through the tears. "Your 41%, and my 5 years of financial evidence. We don't just take down Baek Ho's supply chain, Do-hyun. We take down the whole rotten structure, in the light, with the truth as the weapon, exactly the way you said you wanted it. And then we deal with Chul-min before he turns those docks into a repeat of the worst night of your life." She spreads her files back across the desk, but now they overlay his instead of opposing them. 5 years of subpoenaed bank records and confidential informant testimony sliding into place against 10 years of shell company architecture, like two halves of a key finally rejoined. Chol-min's meeting, she says, tapping a surveillance photograph Thomas provided only hours earlier, is scheduled for the same night as your gala announcement. He's not being subtle about it, Do-hyun. He wants Jae-min gone before your investment closes, because once Iron Crescent holds the majority stake, any coup he stages inherits a company under federal financial scrutiny instead of a clean criminal empire. He's racing your timeline without knowing he's racing it. Then we move the timeline up, Do-hyun says, and something in his chest, coiled tight for 10 years, finally begins, incrementally, to loosen, because for the first time since the water closed over his head, he is not carrying this alone. We announce at the gala, public, unavoidable, witnessed by 300 shareholders and every financial journalist in Seoul. No room for anyone to disappear a body or bury a story this time. And your task force hits the docks the same hour, before Chol-min's soldiers even understand why their coup collapsed under them. Seo-yeon looks at him for a long moment, something fierce and grieving and hopeful, all fighting for space behind her eyes. 10 years, she says again, quieter this time. You carried this alone for 10 years. I had to become someone strong enough to carry it, he says. I just didn't know, until tonight, that I was allowed to put any of it down. The climax arrives 3 nights later at the Baekho Pharmaceuticals annual shareholders gala, held, with an irony Do-hyun allows himself to savor privately, in the same glass atrium where he first shook Jae-min's trembling hand. The room glitters with the same orchids, the same champagne towers, 300 investors and executives and journalists gathered beneath banners promising a legacy of care, unaware that within the hour the legacy will collapse into public wreckage. Do-hyun takes the stage before Jae-min can stop him, invited ostensibly to say a few words as Iron Crescent formally announces a strategic majority investment in Baekho Pharmaceuticals, a transaction Jae-min agreed to weeks earlier believing it would stabilize the company's finances. What Jae-min does not know, standing at the edge of the stage, with his trembling hand hidden in his pocket and a smile still fixed to his face for the cameras, is that the strategic investment closed at midnight, that Iron Crescent's 41% has just become 52%, that the man about to address 300 shareholders owns the company Jae-min built his second life upon. 10 years ago, Do-hyun says into the microphone, his real voice unmodulated for the first time in a decade, letting the accent and cadence of the man he used to be surface fully in front of every camera in the room. 3 men shot me and threw me into Busan harbor. The room goes utterly silent. Jae-min's smile does not move, but his face drains of color so completely that even the cameras catch it, and Do-hyun watches the exact second recognition detonates behind his former brother's eyes, watches 10 years of carefully buried guilt surface all at once, in front of every journalist he has spent a decade cultivating. They believed I was dead, Do-hyun continues, his voice steady even as his pulse hammers, because Chairman Yoon Jae-min gave the order, jealous that our dying chairman had chosen me as his successor instead of him. I did not die. I spent 10 years building the company that now owns the majority of this one. Every dollar Baekho Pharmaceuticals has laundered through its supply chain in the last 3 years has passed, unknowingly, through accounts I control. Every clean face this organization has shown the public has been paid for with money I traced, documented, and am prepared, tonight, to hand over in full to the Financial Crimes Division of the prosecutor's office. Camera shutters detonate across the room in a wave. Journalists who arrived expecting a routine investment announcement suddenly scrambling over each other for a clearer angle. Phones raised, a murmur rising through 300 shareholders that swells within seconds into open, disbelieving noise. A woman near the champagne tower drops her glass and does not notice it shatter. An older investor near the front row, one of the original board members who served under Chairman Oh decades earlier, rises slowly from his seat with tears standing in his eyes and says, loud enough to carry Kang Do-hyun, in a voice thick with something between grief and disbelief, as though speaking a name he buried himself 10 years earlier and never expected to say again outside of memory. Jae-min lunges for the stage, not toward Do-hyun but toward the exit, years of paranoid instinct finally justified in the worst possible way, and that is when Baek Sol-min standing near the doors with the particular stillness of a man who has spent 3 weeks quietly deciding where his loyalty truly belongs, steps into his old boss's path. "You lied to me about him," Seoul says quietly, only loud enough for the small circle around them to hear, his eyes wet with a decade of misplaced grief for a man who was never actually dead. "You told me he betrayed the Syndicate. You made me hate a ghost you created." Around the edges of the room, security officers who are not Baekho's own step forward, badges flashing under the chandelier light, Seo-yeon at their head with a warrant that has been ready for 3 days, waiting only for Do-hyun's public confirmation to become executable. Simultaneously, 60 kilometers south, at the Busan docks where this story began, a second team moves on a warehouse where Yoon Chul-min has gathered 40 of Jae-min's soldiers for what he told them would be a change in leadership. Rain hammers the corrugated roof of the warehouse the way it hammered the pier 10 years earlier, and for one suspended second before the raid begins, floodlights sweep across the same stretch of black water that once closed over Do-hyun's head, as though the harbor itself were finally collecting on an old debt. Chul-min has just finished distributing weapons to his assembled soldiers, promising them a cleaner, hungrier Baekho once Jae-min is dealt with. When the warehouse doors are breached from 3 directions at once, Thomas Bay's private security force, moving with the precise, wordless coordination of men trained by the same hand that trained Do-hyun himself, backed by a joint task force whose warrants, thanks to Seo-yeon, were signed and sealed 2 days earlier. The coup collapses before its first shot is fired, 31 soldiers surrendering their weapons within 90 seconds under floodlight and rifle scope, Chul-min himself dragged out through the same rusted loading door his ambition meant to walk through as a conqueror, screaming into the rain that none of this was supposed to happen this way, that Jae-min was supposed to be the only one who fell, that a man who plans a coup around another man's downfall should perhaps have considered that downfalls rarely arrive alone. Thomas Bay stands at the edge of the warehouse in the rain long after the last soldier has been loaded into a transport van, staring out at the black water where his mentor nearly died a decade earlier, and allows himself, for the first time since he found Do-hyun alive in that Zurich apartment, to believe the debt of that night has finally, fully, been repaid. Jae-min does not run far. He makes it to the atrium's private elevator before Do-hyun catches him, and for one suspended moment, the 2 men stand alone in the mirrored car, 10 years and every betrayal between them compressed into the space of a few feet. "Why didn't you just kill me?" Jae-min asks, and his voice has none of the polish left, just the raw sound of the boy from the Busan slum who once shared his last bowl of rice with a friend who would not let him go hungry. "It would have been easier, cleaner, because killing you would have made me exactly what you were that night on the dock," Do-hyun says. "I wanted you to live long enough to watch everything you built on my grave turn to ash in front of the whole country. I wanted you to understand, finally, that loyalty was never the thing that made you weak. Cowardice did. You could have told me the truth. You could have fought me for that chair like a man instead of drowning me like a secret. I would have respected that. I might have even stepped aside. Instead, you turned us both into ghosts." Jae-min slides down against the mirrored wall until he is sitting on the elevator floor, all the polish and power stripped away in an instant, just a tired man in an expensive suit, finally facing the weight of a decade. "I think about that night every single day," he says, voice cracking. "I think about the sound the water made when they threw you in. I used to wake up and reach for my phone to call you before I remembered. 15 years, Do-hyun. 15 years of trusting you with my life, and I still let one sentence from a dying man convince me you'd take everything from me. I was already losing myself before I ever gave that order. I just didn't know it yet." "You didn't lose yourself that night," Do-hyun says quietly, looking down at the man who was once his brother. "You revealed yourself. There's a difference, and it took me 10 years in the water to understand it." The elevator doors open onto a lobby full of police lights bleeding red and blue across marble, and Jae-min goes without resistance, weeping the same real tears he wept at that dinner in Itaewon, and Do-hyun watches him taken away and feels, for the first time in a decade, something loosen in his chest that he had stopped believing could ever loosen again. 1 year later, the glass atrium in Yeouido has a new banner, simpler now, reading only Baekho Holdings, a name the company kept because Do-hyun decided, after long consideration, that erasing history entirely was its own kind of lie, and that a legacy earns redemption by changing what it does, not by hiding what it was. Under his chairmanship and Seo-yeon's ongoing oversight as a consultant to its compliance board, the company has shed every laundering front, settled with the families of a dozen victims of Baekho's old pharmaceutical fraud, and posted its first fully transparent audited earnings in the organization's history. Financial journalists call it the most remarkable corporate redemption story in a decade. Do-hyun calls it, privately, the only kind of revenge that leaves something worth keeping standing at the end. Yoon Jae-min sits in a cell in a maximum security facility outside Seoul, convicted on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and a decade of financial crimes that took 11 months to fully untangle in court, sentenced to 22 years with no possibility of early release given the violence of his original crime. He writes Do-hyun a letter every few months that Do-hyun does not answer but also, notably, does not burn, each one a little less like a confession and a little more like the ordinary correspondence of an old friend describing prison meals and the small mercies of a library cart, as though some buried part of the boy from Nampo-dong is quietly trying to become a man worth forgiving, one slow letter at a time. Do-hyun has not decided yet whether that man will ever exist. He keeps the letters in a drawer in the Gangnam penthouse, unanswered but unthrown, because some debts, he has learned, are not meant to be resolved quickly, only carried honestly. Baek Sol-min testified against his old boss, choosing, in the end, loyalty to the truth over loyalty to the man who lied to him for a decade, and now works quietly as head of security for Baekho Holdings' legitimate logistics division, a soldier finally allowed to lay down a war he never chose, training a new generation of guards to protect shipments instead of secrets. Yoon Chul-min received 14 years, his ambition having outpaced his patience by exactly the margin that saved everyone else's life, and spends his sentence. According to prison reports, Do-hyun reads without any particular satisfaction, insisting to anyone who will listen that he was the only honest man in the entire organization, a claim that grows lonelier with each passing year. Han Mi-suk, the fisherwoman who pulled a corpse out of Busan harbor and refused to let it stay one, now runs a small seafood restaurant near the same docks, fully funded, against her repeated protests, by a silent partner she still calls, fondly, the boy I fished out of the water. Do-hyun visits every month, sits at her counter, eats grilled mackerel, and says nothing about the debt he can never fully repay, because some debts are meant to be carried rather than paid. Baekho Holdings has since funded a scholarship in Chairman Oh Tae-sung's name for children aging out of the same Busan orphanages and slums that once produced both Do-hyun and Jae-min, a program Seo-yeon chairs personally, insisting that if her father's legacy is going to mean anything beyond a headstone on a quiet hillside, it should mean giving the next hungry, capable child a door that does not require 15 years of violence to walk through. The first graduating class of scholarship recipients, numbers 11, Do-hyun attends every one of their university acceptance ceremonies personally, standing quietly at the back of each auditorium, and tells no one why the sight of a frightened teenager walking across a stage towards something better than the life they were born into makes his throat tighten every single time. Seo-yeon stands with him one evening in early spring on the same stretch of the Busan pier where he nearly died 10 years and 1 year ago, the water calm now, gold with sunset instead of black with rain, and takes his hand the way she took it across his glass desk on the night everything changed. Gulls wheel low over the breakwater. Somewhere behind them, faintly, comes the smell of grilled mackerel from Han Mi-suk's restaurant, and the sound of her scolding a customer who has ordered the wrong side dish, exactly the ordinary, unremarkable noise of a life continuing. "Any regrets?" she asks, the wind pulling strands of hair across her face. He thinks about it honestly, the way he has learned to think about everything since the truth stopped being a thing he had to hide. "One," he says finally, "I regret every year I let you believe I was someone I never was. I regret every ceremony I watched from a rented car instead of standing beside you where I belonged. 10 years is a long time to grieve someone who is only asleep. She smiles, and it reaches all the way to her eyes for what feels, to both of them, like the first time in a very long decade. Then let's not waste any more of them, she says. And he does not. Because a man who has already died once learns, if he is fortunate enough to be given a second life, exactly how little time is worth wasting. He tells her, standing there with the tide sliding in over the same stones that once nearly buried him, that he intends to spend whatever years remain to him building things instead of burying them, and she tells him, laughing for real now, that he can start by finally answering one of Jaemin's letters, because even ghosts, she says, deserve the mercy of being heard, if never quite the mercy of being forgiven. Blood does not make a brother, and fear does not make a leader, and the only loyalty worth building an empire on is the kind that survives being tested in the dark, because everything else, given enough rain and enough time, eventually washes out to sea. A man who is thrown away can still choose, in the years that follow, exactly what he becomes, and that choice, in the end, is the only inheritance worth leaving behind, the only chair worth inheriting, the only legacy worth surviving the water for.